Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sib. Starting a little bit later, it was my fault in terms of back-to-back meetings all morning. So apologies for the late start, but we are here, and I'm really excited to chat with Julian John, who's going to be talking with us all about workplace inclusion. I'm sure we're going to touch on some other topics and tangents as we go. But first of all, thanks for joining, Julian.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for the invitation.
How's your day been so far?
It's all right. It's where are we now? 14 weeks of lockdown, and I've got a 7 and 8-year-old running around to keep me amused. Right. So it's a distraction from Peppa Pig and children's TV. All is good.
All is good in the world. That's great to hear. And obviously, as always, we will touch upon sort of how COVID-19's affected you in different ways, but we'll get to that later. I think, as always, it'd be great just to kick us off with a little bit of a summary as to who you are and your work, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about the sort of past side of that in a minute as well.
Okay, so my name's Julian John. I'm the managing director of a company called Delcian. We're based in Wales. We're a people and development consultancy, but our focus is around inclusion, helping organizations through the training and development we do to become more inclusive. My background's in human resources and learning development, and we'll touch on it. My experiences of disability is what led me to start the company. And we've also got a social goal, and I'm very keen to see what we can do around the whole conversation around inclusion and disability in Wales, specifically in the workplace. So that's what we're all about.
That's a lovely kick-off, and we've got a comment coming in from YouTube. You probably know Gavin.
I do.
He's saying, how awesome to have Jules on the Daily Sib, one of the most passionate, engaging speakers I've ever had the pleasure to listen to. So,
oh, shucks, Gavin. The tenner's in the post.
I was going to say, you can bung him that money later. So, I've not had the pleasure of seeing you speak at a conference, Julian, but I've heard a few people compliment you on your talks and speaking. So you're obviously doing something right.
It comes from the Welsh passion. I just end up shouting at a lot of people, but as long as the message gets through.
Love it. So, so you sort of mentioned, I'm glad you said it's Delcian, because I always pronounce it Delcian. So good to clarify the pronunciation as well there.
So I'll give you a background to where the name comes from. So obviously we're a Welsh organisation, and my wife's name is Adele. We call it Del. And Sion is Welsh for John. So I keep on saying it's named after my wife, but it sounds like she's passed away, but she hasn't. So it's called Delcian,
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting the different ways that names are formed, but that's a lovely, sort of personal reason as well. Cool.
So the other thing is all her fault, so I can just blame it.
Either way, yeah. So tell us a bit more. I mean, obviously you talked about being in HR, and obviously, on a business level, there's a lot of benefits to investing in your people. You get recruit the right people. You can retain good people. You get all of the very sort of hardcore functional benefits of a good HR strategy is good for business, and it's good for the people because they're healthier and happier, and hopefully got that work-life balance and able to do things out of work as much as be happy in work. So I think that there's a good stuff around the HR side to just touch upon in general. But when did that bring you more into the disability side of it as well?
Well, my background's human resources, learning and development, mainly within retail organisations.
Right.
And I was fortunate to work at a senior level around some great things, some great projects around employee engagement, did a lot of recruiting. I've recruited about 2,500 people. We've sat down and worked out the other day. But through everything that I've done within my HR career, what really ticked my boxes was around the potential in people. In bringing people, certainly within a retail organization where there tends to be more entry-level roles, but to seeing people develop and go through an organization and achieving what they can achieve and bringing their skill sets, their experience, that knowledge, that's what ticks my boxes.
Yeah.
2005, 15 years ago, I suffered from brain damage. And as part of that brain damage, I was left housebound for 3 odd years. We were homeless for a time. It took me 5 years to learn to stand, walk and talk again. My biggest issue that I found was that I suddenly became unemployable. I ticked the box which said disability, and for all my experiences, all my wealth and knowledge, all my achievements in the past, that stood for next to nothing. And when we go back to my experiences and what really ignites me with getting the potential out of people and seeing it time and time again, that just wasn't right. And for all the work, I'd done plenty of work that was around inclusion previously, and I thought we're missing a trick here. We're missing a trick where employers don't get it. Not for the want of not wanting to, but just for the way it's framed. Yeah. So I thought, with my experience and my knowledge, perhaps there's an opportunity to make a difference. So that's where I started the business. But it was also, and I'll be truthfully honest, no one was going to give me a job. So this was my pathway back into work, which is why I spend quite a bit of time looking at disabled enterprise at the moment as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, as you know, I'm very fascinated and passionate about entrepreneurship and the sort of, the reasons that people start their own business, which you've touched upon, that it was almost there was a problem there that needed solving, and it was also a solution to your own problem of getting back into the workforce and business by creating your own job and your own business. But I mean, what were some of the early challenges and problems that you found when you very often people have a great idea and they're all charged up to get out there and make it happen, and then invariably, the world doesn't always play out the plan as you have it in your mind originally. How was the launch of Delscian?
Well, it was, to start off with, it was just to see whether I could work. Yeah. Whether after my recovery and all the rehabilitation, whether I was able to start doing 2-3 hours a week. And then it was trying to define a market which sits around disability and the support, and also to put it higher up on people's agenda. Just to go back a bit with regards to why organizations should employ disabled people, the question sits of why not? Organizations want to get the best potential in people into those organizations. What they need to understand is that there's a wealth of knowledge that sits across a number of talent pools. Because just some of the barriers that sits there, and a lot of it is just because they don't know and don't want to ask. So therefore that people make decisions where they say no rather than yes. That's some of the work that we do. But with regards to I took quite a bold step. I set up the business. We started to do little bits and pieces work, but I wanted to do something which sort of had a bit of a statement. And I'd gone to an event, which is a disability confidence event, when I wasn't working. And I stood there and I begged for a job. I just told the employers were there, and there was very few employers that happened to be at the event I was at. And that sort of struck me as quite odd, given the amount of people that I knew within HR. So I wanted to do something within Swansea, where we live, based around bringing businesses together and bringing disabled people together and having a conversation on businesses and organised levels of what can be expected and what should happen and how to remove the barriers. And that went really, really well. And I used that as, I suppose, not as a launch pad, but just as sort of just to set the scene of engagement. I talk about knowledge, empathy, engagement, of how we can help organizations learn to treat people as individuals on the round. But I hit the same barriers as anyone. You keep talking. People said to me, I remember someone saying to me, "You've got to kiss a lot of frogs." And it was just knocking on doors and talking to people just to slowly get that message around. Yeah.
It's the entrepreneurial way. Very often it's as much as there's a glamour has and can be associated around entrepreneurship in more recent years, the reality is it's just getting out there and staying true to that vision, harnessing that passion. And as you say, like a lot of door knocking and a lot of conversations, right?
Yeah, and it's about selling a vision. It's about certainly what I'm trying to achieve in Wales. It is, as I said, I'm very clear. The social goal of our organisation, and myself personally, is to make Wales a leading nation around disability inclusion, specifically within the workplace. And it's being able to tell people, look, this is what good looks like. This is what we can achieve. This is how we can change the entire approach of everything we do and create that environment around the social model that just enables people, just gives people that opportunity rather than the traditional approach, which we know hasn't been as successful as it could be over the years.
So obviously when you've, it's knocked on lots of doors, had lots of conversations, talked about the vision, once you've sort of got inside an organization a bit more and they're aware that there's, I think the word problem and opportunity are quite synonymous in general, but particularly in this instance that you're pointing out the issue that they're not being open and inclusive to all parts of the potential talent pool with recruitment, etc., etc. But in doing so, there's a lot of upside and a lot of benefit. So how does that then play out? I mean, I'm sure everyone's different, but what over the years, what have been some of the common themes of the difficulties that your clients had, but then the ways that you're able to help them overcome those difficulties?
Well, if you take diversity and inclusion as a whole subject, as an example, so we've got something which will sit in an organization saying we want to be more inclusive and we want to be more representative, we need to be more diverse. So what do we do? And there's so many options that are available to normally the HR director that sits in an organization or wherever it may land, that there's a number of things that you can do. You can do something which sits around BAME. You can sign up to the Stonewall Index. You can be a disability confident leader. You can do all these different aspects, but all of these sit in silos. So what you get is a series of events rather than an ongoing strategy that said, this is our diversity and inclusion offering, and this is where disability sits within it. So one of the things we do is a lot around the strategy. Say, look, we've got like a 5-stage strategy we call SEREN, which we use to say, like, this is how you create that strategy. So it's an ongoing piece where it touches every single area of the organization, which then we could then look at all the different protected characteristics or the groups that sit within it. But there's an overall piece that sits around inclusion, and it's helping and support organizations to understand what can be achieved. There's a lot of organizations don't know how to measure the successes that sit in inclusion, and certainly around disability. Everyone always wants to start a recruitment, and I go, well, that's a great place to start, but let's look internally first.
I was going to say, very often there's people with a disability already in a company, and no one's aware of that. Yeah,
and I sort of look at the top, middle, and the bottom. So, and I'll rephrase that, I think. So in regards to what the senior management do, what groups, networks can do within organizations, but what management can do, and how you empower managers to treat people as individuals and to lead through inclusion by inclusive practices, and just understanding what an individual's needs are, what that scenario looks like. It's really, really key for me, and put that in the right way that organizations do. A lot of organizations try and do something which is completely alien them to an organization. Doesn't fit in with what they do, and it's blending some of this culture shift and some of these approaches into with what that organization does on a day-to-day basis.
And so when you're bringing that into the organizations that you work with, how is that done? Is it sort of training lessons? Is it mentoring or coaching certain staff? What kind of techniques are there?
Combination of everything. So if we'll do a strategy session with leaderships within organizations or whatever, but it doesn't have to be leadership, whoever can drive it within an organization. We look at then how we can communicate that through the organization, how we can engage everyone, how we can involve people. I've got a real bugbear about people speaking on behalf of disabled people. The information within an organization around disability should come from disabled people because we are the experts and we sit around the knowledge. We do coaching and mentoring, as you said. We do a lot of, the majority of the work we do is development and training development just to get that knowledge in there. But also we assist at every single level to say, look, when your board of directors understands how disability and inclusion impacts on everything they do, then they'll get that cascaded down their apartment. When everyone in the organization has a voice around disability and are seen as subject matter experts within an organization, that's when you empower the organization, and that's when you empower individuals within it as well.
Yeah, I know. Well, we had Tab Ahmad I think it was last week. The time is flying by at the moment, Julian. Talking about she runs employability. But yeah, she was saying about the word disclosure for her is not so much of a positive thing, that almost like we don't need to know who has a disability, but we need people to feel confident to speak out about the workplace adjustments. And it'd be great to get your views from your experience and knowledge of how you sit on the disclosure conversation, the workplace adjustments conversation.
I've done a whole lot of work around employee engagement, how people are engaged in the workplace. And there was very much a view at the outset, you just go around poking people with a big stick and telling them to be happy. That's not what engagement is. It's about creating that environment, that culture to allow people to be engaged in work. And disclosure is exactly the same thing. It's about creating that environment and that culture to allow people to feel comfortable, to understand they'll be supported and helped by disclosing. And that's it. So you can, a lot of organizations say we want to drive up disclosure rates. And I go, well, you need to create the environment to allow it to do that. It's not something you can push. It's not something you can prod. However, there are a number of measurements you can put in place to start looking at what that impact is. Labor turnover, for example, when people leave an organization. So it'd be interesting to see that, say, after 3 months, why would someone leave an organization? And if it's on the base that they aren't supported or there's not, that infrastructure isn't there, that could be a real key indicator that there's some of their practices aren't inclusive. Recruitment. How many people do they get through application stage, to interview stage, to start stage, to induction stage? All of those are real key measurements which we don't necessarily put an inclusion or disability focus lens on, which will give you a heap of information of where organizations are performing well or need to improve. So there's some of the aspects we tend to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in any part of the disability puzzle, if you like, the world of inclusion, and even in non-disability places, that there's always we can get into like semantics, and language is powerful, particularly when you're trying to empower a community that is being oppressed. Language is really vital for reclaiming, but I sometimes feel that the language can just muddy the conversation, that everyone's not arguing but discussing a lot about what words should be like disclosure, but like actually, as you said, it's the environment that everyone feels that it's safe and they're comfortable on both sides of the coin as well. Like for management, I guess, to be able to have support in being a better manager to someone with a disability as well.
And that's key. There's so many managers have perceived so many pitfalls around language, just having what they believe may be uncomfortable conversations, don't want to be seen to be prying, that we need to give people the confidence around this, because otherwise they'll just retreat. They'll just go into their shells and they won't want to be engaged. They don't want to know more. They'll just ignore it. And that's the biggest shame, because we all know that the best managers are the most inclusive managers, because they have that skill set of wanting to know about personal well-being and wanting to know about what individuals need within an organization, having that caring approach. And that's some of the things that we really need to instill within organizations, to have these open and real proper conversations. The conversation that we would have amongst family and friends around disability is completely different to the conversation that we'd have in the workplace. We'd relate to, if we were talking with family friends, with an aunt, an uncle, a next door neighbor, someone you were in school with, yourself. Those conversations don't take place on an open front within the workplace because they're not seen. And the other thing I'm really, really keen of is regards to, if we go back and we talk about engagement again, that if you've seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a triangle piece which says that there's a number of needs you must fulfill to reach the top. When we look at disabled people in the workplace, it's the real fundamentals that are missed. It's the ability to get into the workplace, get into a role, get into the workplace, have what you need to be able to do your job in the first place. Before we even start looking at the aspiration of people to be going higher and higher up within that chain. So that's one of the key things that organizations need to understand, is they need to have the basics in place to support people. It's not good if your door doesn't work or the accessibility piece isn't there. Sorry, you get me on my soapbox now.
No, it's very interesting. I was talking about how people get retreats, you used the word retreat, didn't you? But the way that people, when they don't feel comfortable to ask about things, they retreat and feel uncomfortable. I've been banging on about this sort of, it's becoming almost a slogan that I'm going to have put on a t-shirt soon, I think. But for me, political correctness is the enemy of inclusion, because we're so scared of not being PC and saying a word that's not the right word, that people I've seen it, in my life, people would almost not speak to me and not engage with me at all because they're just so worried they're going to say something wrong to me. And that is awful, that this fear of saying the wrong thing is putting up more barriers.
It was, my father had, my wife had cancer and my father had terminal cancer. And in both occasions, people didn't know what to say to them, so they didn't say anything at all. Yeah. So I saw my father certainly lose a whole lot of friends around it. And certainly from a work perspective, which is one of the reasons why we do what we do. I saw my wife go back into the workplace and they just pretended she hadn't been away. Didn't care when she came back, didn't want to check on her welfare, because didn't want to broach that conversation. And I was with a conversation at one point, and I'd been talking to the States. I'd been on calls all day, so I've got brain damage. Cognitively, sometimes I'm not as acute as I should be. And I'd been used to the terms people with disabilities, talking about people with disabilities, as opposed to disabled people.
Oh, yeah, that's a difficult one.
Yeah. And I was in a conversation with someone, and at the point we were talking about getting 60,000 disabled people into work within Wales, and I said people with disabilities, I was stopped and I was corrected, saying, I don't think you're using the right language. And it's like, well, I'll explain the reasons why. Yeah. However, you've just stopped a conversation where we're talking about getting 60,000
Yeah.
And language, and I absolutely understand. I get offended by certain terminology, whatever. But when it becomes a barrier, then we just need to help people understand the correct language, the correct terminology. Is a key point for me again, and that's one of the things that we talk about with some of the stuff that we do.
Yeah. I wonder, because you're saying about in the workplace, it's sometimes felt not appropriate to ask about people's well-being, is it disability or not disability, but that general inclusive nature. Some might argue that isn't what work is for. I don't know if that's cultural or generational, but you must have come across some people saying, no, that's how it should be at work.
From my approach with people, it's, well, what do we do? Just expect someone to come in called Mr. and Mrs. Brown and sit at the desk and have no understanding what's going on outside of the workplace, which is absolutely fine. But when it comes to where people have what barriers to what they need to be able to do anything within the workplace and perform, then surely it's better to have a relationship or an understanding of that person's background. And again, that's part of inclusion. So some of the stuff I talk about is how you treat people as individuals. Forget the silos, how you treat people as individuals. In order to treat people as individuals, you have to know what they are as individuals to a certain degree. I'm not saying you need to know the ins and outs.
Sure.
But I certainly, from a management point of view, I've challenged people outside the inclusion sphere of saying, well, do you know what your team are? Do you know who your team are? What makes up your team? Because again, when we look at flexible working, all the things that you can bring in place, we keep on assuming. I think that's the problem. We just keep on assuming that so-and-so's fine, that's the right thing to do, because we've either done it before or because we haven't asked the right question of our teams and our individuals and groups.
So last question before we sort of get into COVID-19 present territory. What's your view been of the progress the last, say, 10 years? I mean, there's obviously been, a lot, but the Valuable 500's got a lot of airtime and awareness the last couple of years. But what generally in the workplace, how much do you think things have improved versus how much is there still to go?
Yeah, so if we look at the last 10 years, I think the last 3 years, we've seen some real jumps forward. We've seen a couple of steps back, but in the whole, the conversations that tend to sit around different areas of inclusion now include disability, which is great to see. I think the work that Caroline Casey does around the Value by 500 is fantastic because it starts those conversations. And it starts those conversations at the right level to allow people to be more informed. Are we there yet? I think there's some things which are tick box exercises out there, which you'll always get. And for me, if it doesn't impact on an individual within an organisation, it's not worth doing. I think there needs to be a lot more understanding. I think I've got a couple of fears and concerns with what's going on at the moment, which I'm sure we'll come on to now, with how the fact that the recruitment market has been very, very tight, which has meant that organizations have been forced to a certain degree to look at the wider talent pools, which includes disability, which is the wrong way to look at it, but that tends to be a fact. And that will change. I think there's a lot of organizations. For now, we see the likes of Accenture, Deloitte start producing reports of the impact on disability in the workplace, and that's going to help the cause. So we're starting to hear voices from organizations, whereas 5 years ago, they say, we'd like to do something, but we don't really want to put our head above the parapet. But it's got to go in the right direction. All of this is a case of when it happens rather than if. So the likes of ourselves, we're just pushing it forward a little bit further forward.
Sure. And I guess part of what you were saying there is that measurement, isn't it? That sort of having the research and stats to benchmark, like, so we actually can see where the progress is as well.
Yeah, it's a return on investment. In a commercial world, from my background with learning and development, if you run development courses, you have to understand what it's going to give you. There has to be some attributable to that organization. We know that organizations that are more inclusive, are more diverse, are more creative. That's a fact. But these are the things that are only starting to come to the fore now. And the more data that sits around there, human resources as a profession is certainly becoming more evidence-based and more data-driven. So no, I think we're not where we should be. We keep talking about it, so we don't have to talk about it anymore. But no, we are moving in the right direction.
And so, as we've alluded to on and off the last 20 odd minutes about COVID-19, I mean, first of all, personally, how's that impacted your day-to-day life?
It's been a real eye-opener for myself, I have to admit. On a personal level, it shows that I was probably pushing myself into an environment which wasn't best suited to me with regards to getting out on the road and going to meetings and being driven here, there and everywhere. This is a much better environment for myself. It really is. It's more accessible. So we need a blended approach. And it's certainly given me the time to think. But what is interesting is also that I spent more time that my kids are obviously off, spent both of those, my children are disabled. So I spent more time with them and really understand what their needs are. And also my wife looks like she's had the virus at some time and wasn't particularly well with it. So we had a bit of a rocky period. But it just shows what priorities are as well. That's what it's a key thing for me at the moment.
I think that's been a big thing for everyone, hasn't it? That, you know, we're all so busy and we're charging around, and, you know, we obviously all love our families dearly, and we, you know, that they are a priority, but this definitely got people to stop and think a bit and slow down a bit. And, you know, it'd be interesting when we come out how many people will sort of rush back to what it was, and how many will say, actually, you know, I know I've heard a lot of businesses say they're going to be much more flexible to, you know, working from home. Those obviously that are able to. There are some jobs it's not possible, but yeah, it's definitely opened up a lot, not just for disabled people, but for everybody, that, you know, there is maybe a different way to have a working life.
And I think it is. I think there's a couple of things that sit with it. I put something on LinkedIn a while ago that said the organizations that want more accessibility, more flexibility, more creativity, and have a better take on problem solving, which are all the things which are needed at the moment, are the more inclusive organizations. So there's a benefit that sits with that. The reasonable adjustment piece that sits around flexible working, or flexible working in general, a lot of those questions have been quashed now. The reasons why they couldn't do it, those excuses aren't there. So organizations have to be more flexible. I have a concern where unfortunately there is going to be fallout. There are going to be redundancies, hopefully temporarily, around this. But there are people who are performing at a much higher level, working remotely with an environment that suits them more. And I want that to be recognized by organizations. So when they start looking at, right, so what does our future skill sets look like? It has to include the ability to work from home, remote working. And that skill set needs to then go into recruitment when recruitment starts. And on the other side, it also has to look in, if they are looking at what people they retain in an organization, they need to understand they can't look traditionally at the people who've performed well in the office. They now have to include people that have worked flexibly. And with the recruitment pieces, there's huge opportunity around disability in that. As long as organizations recognize it now and capture those skill sets and put that part into the recruitment and development stage. So that's one of the key. We can't go back like a spring and just go back to the way we were before, because we'll lose all this knowledge and all that experience.
And do you think businesses do see that?
Yeah, I think organizations that get it absolutely do. The ones that are flourishing. I've done some pieces of work about organizations around remote working, and also what it looks like when people are starting to return back to the traditional workplace. And there's some real key culture lessons that sit within there. And again, there's a lot around management and what managers need to do. It's a lot about what we've empowered people to do. And some of it's going to be what we then take away from people. Because there's some things where people have really had extra skill sets, have stood up to take on extra roles, and we need to start recognizing that. As always, the good organizations will get it, but it's more crucial than ever that organizations really understand where their benefits lie, because everything's getting that little bit tighter and a little bit more competitive out there.
Yeah, and also you've talked a lot about, through your work and your business, you're working with other businesses on helping them to be more inclusive. How, are there any ways that disabled people sort of plug in to what you're doing, whether it's training or mentoring? But my question's more broadly, not just through Delzian. What can disabled people do in general to support businesses to be more inclusive, or to help that inclusion in the workplace become more of a reality?
Help them understand, give them the knowledge. That's the key. Provide that knowledge. I've got chronic peripheral vestibular dysfunction, and when I was being treated, I went to see one of the leading experts in the world. I class myself as a second leading expert in the world because I haven't got the medical background, but I know more about me than anyone else does.
Yeah, of course.
And again, it is it's just helping people understand. But unfortunately, what is the barrier is that opportunity to help people understand, where if you do tick the box on a recruitment form, that you don't get any further, where there isn't accessibility to do things, and just helping people see it from that empathy side, from a different angle.
Yeah, Gavin's just asked the question. The Scope campaign, End the Awkward, was super, but I feel it came and went, and for culture to change, they must be persistent. How can we ensure the best campaigns are more than just campaigns?
They don't have to be. That's the whole point, isn't it? That's what you've got around campaigns. This is where it's the role of the organization to have that strategy. And it can't be a 3-month piece. It can't be a 6-month piece. It can't even be a 12-month piece. It has to be a 5-year ongoing piece. IBM sell computers. That's what they do. If you ask anyone in an organization what they do, they sell. And in exactly the same way, there needs to be roots within an organization to say, we are inclusive. There must be a stopgap for every single person within that organization to understand, yes, we are inclusive, and we are inclusive by doing this. We support disabled people by doing that. We can't just let it, as I said, we can't let it sit as one person's responsibility in an organization to ensure that diversity and inclusion happens. These initiatives are great. They give more information, but they can't be just flashes. They can't be just like a firework display. It has to be a long-term piece. And that is the role. That's what organizations' responsibility sits.
Yeah, agreed. So before we move on from that, is there anything more around the COVID-19 world that you wanted to just mention? Any observations or thoughts about kind of the impact, whether that's negative or positive?
I just think we got to take the opportunity to learn from it. I genuinely do. and as I said, capture all these learnings, and not just think we can just go back to going through all of this and pretending it didn't happen, because we'll miss a huge opportunity, not only for disabled people, but just for organizations to perform better.
Society, yeah.
Yeah,
agreed. And so, what I mean, what's the kind of, so some people have got, when I've asked about the future, they've got very specific big plans that, even during COVID-19, they're working on some new stuff, or after COVID-19, they're going to set the world alight again. And others are just, day at a time. Let's just get through where we are at the moment. But where are you sat on that? Are you dreaming up some new initiatives?
Yeah, so we've taken a lot of our stuff was face to face, so that's online, but that's more of a technical piece. We recently finished a piece with when the health boards in Wales, where we took a cohort of managers for a period of 6 months, and just coached, mentored, developed, did everything we could just to talk about as we're talking about, just to help them lead through inclusion. And I want to see that on a wider bit, because there's so many successes that sit around there. But my social goal remains to make Wales the leading nation for inclusion, specifically around the workplace for disabled people. And I want to create an environment in Wales where every organisation gets it. We have an eco structure that supports it, that accessibility is absolutely key, that accessibility is available in every organisation, that the culture sits there, and that we join all those dots around, that so we have a one nation or a region that we can actually say every organisation gets it. So we're not reliant on an individual organisation to be the torchbearer for this. We just get it. And that's what I'll keep driving for. And I don't do that as a mad pipe dream. I don't do that because it sounds good. I do that because I absolutely, truly believe that it can happen. I absolutely believe that if some of the things are in place now were there when I was trying to get back into work and start the business, then those barriers are there. I absolutely believe we can join the dots up between the education, employers, all the support that sits around there. My children will have a much better opportunity to do what they want to do. It's absolutely achievable. It can be done. We just need a lot of engagement. So I'll always have my big plans. I'll always have the big broad statements, but on the basis we can do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you said about the tech, like what have you been doing with some of the tech changes at the moment?
Clued up on all my Microsoft stuff. Love what Microsoft are doing around the accessibility piece. So we've switched some of our accounts to there. We've been looking at Teams. We've been looking at just how we can take our face-to-face learnings and split that into, rather than a 4-hour workshop, into separate sessions. And we've also been looking at what people want. And just at a real temperature check of, right, how do we do this? Because everything when I want to transfer knowledge, it has to be engaging. People want to learn, to retain around it, and that's slightly different from what we could do on a face-to-face basis to something that may be via a screen or whatever it is. So I've been looking at that, and I said I've also been looking, as I mentioned before, just some of the organizational development stuff that looks around cultures and how inclusion can benefit from some of the things that are going on at the moment.
Yeah,
it keeps me busy, keeps me happy.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, very busy. No, it's great to hear how it's all going. Obviously, we've spoke a few times over the last couple of years, but it was really nice to hear more depth and detail about, that, for example, why Delsian is called Delsian, there's other things. So, no, really nice to catch up today, and obviously, thanks for coming on the show. Well, where can people sort of keep in touch and follow what you're up to?
Twitter is I've got quite a big presence. I got LinkedIn is great. I've got the website, which is www.delsian.co.uk. My email address is julian@delsian.co.uk. You can contact me through the website. Twitter, just Google Jules, JULES_John. That's on Twitter. You'll just get moaning and groaning and what I'm having for lunch on that. We've also got the business Twitter page as well. So just shout, I'll hear you.
Cool. Sounds good. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
No, the only thing I want to add, that through everything that we're going on, that we can look at what loads of other people, it's hard enough just being at the moment without doing. So kindness is key through all of this. So just being kind to yourself, and then be kind to other people, and then we'll get through this, and let's hope we can take some learnings and it'll be a better place for our experiences.
That's the perfect way to end it. I think there Gavin said, keep up the hard work, Julian, and I'll hopefully see you and indeed welcome in Wales one day.
Open door, absolutely open door. I love Gavin to bits and everything he's doing with the Welcome app.
Brilliant. Gavin said no need to read it out, but it's too late. I've already read it out. All right, brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks again, Julian. We'll catch up again soon, and everyone watching, have a good lunch if you've not had your lunch, and have a good afternoon. And we're almost, well, tomorrow's Friday, almost at the weekend again. So I'll see you tomorrow for the next episode of the Daily Sip. Take care for now. Bye-bye, Julian.
Bye.